feed just in case there's something worth talking about. So, hey, it looks like we're live here on the Book of Face and some YouTube, and I don't even know where else this is going out into the ether. And there's so much I could say. Just the introduction about our relationship and the mindfulness coaching that I have taken, that I should take in, the business that you've grown. Julianna, why don't you just tell us about you? Because my bio of you would go on for 10 minutes. It would include the fact that you're like a recording artist and you made it in Hollywood, and then you said, fuck Hollywood, I want to be a mindfulness coach. And I was like, okay, sure, whatever. So just tell us all the things we need to know about you.
Sure. Well, I came to mindfulness with deep skepticism and out of desperation. And this was 23 years ago when I was a recording artist. I had a deal on Warner Brothers. I released a solo record and I had some success, and I was dealing with the yo-yo of the entertainment business, and I was already emotionally a yo-yo. So you combine those two and it's a recipe for disaster. And I just saw clearly that the resources I had at my disposal weren't going to cut it. And I was at a loss at that point. I didn't know how I was going to recover when I would sink. And I could see that there was this pattern of like sinking further down and then recovering, and then sinking further down and recovering. And I could just see that across my life, it was going to take this path that was going to, at best, I'd be sort of chronically unhappy. And something in me finally recognized, this was after I lost my deal and I was waitressing again. Something in me finally recognized, I wasn't even that happy when I had my deal because I was all miserable up here. So it's got to be something here. I got to do something about this. I don't know what, I don't know how, but it's got to be from the inside. And not long after that, I started meditating. And it wasn't until I was introduced to Shinzen Young and I went on a retreat with him, I immersed myself in a week-long training with him, that I saw the potential of mindfulness practice to just alter my insides permanently. And that's what I started doing. For 23 years. And I did it at first as a way to, maintain equilibrium in the middle of the crazy entertainment industry. But then it just became the one thing in my life that anchored me and that gave my life richness and purpose. And so then over time, it became how I wanted to, center my world. So then it was like, okay, well, if I make it my business, then I'll be able to focus on it more. That was the strategy.
So some of the people, there's already a few people watching this live, and it's funny. People might be saying like, well, this is a group about lead generation and growing your business and whatnot. So why is Scott interviewing like a mindfulness, meditation, hippie guru, whatever the case may be, whatever terminology?
No, I'm kidding.
Just a little bit of a hippie. And by the way, if you ever want to be a fly on the wall for one of our political discussions, maybe we should stream one of our political arguments live.
I don't think so.
and teach people how to be really mindful. No, but I think there's two things. One, you can add a ton of business or a ton of business knowledge because you have scaled a massive mindfulness business where you basically took your passion and you're like, hey, I was just looking at your website before we jumped on, and you said you guys have like 160 mindfulness coaches. So kudos, congratulations. What a monster you've built. And I know you guys offer, some group coaching and some skill sets and whatnot. But then also, I think right now, I think of my poor wife. She's trying to do some business and be a mom and run the household and be stuck in quarantine. And the kids can't go to childcare or school. Like, her and I both going a little nuts, right?
Yeah.
And so how can we maybe have some tools that business professional who's like, I've got to work, I've got to lead generate, I've got to feed my family, I've got to be present with my family, I've got to do this, I've got to argue about politics on Facebook, I've got to do that, I've got to do that. How can somebody be protective of their bandwidth right now, especially if they're like a business owner like yourself, or they're just going through the challenges of working from home for the first time in their life? I know that feels pretty normal for you and I, but I'm thinking about the people that might be watching this. Like, what are some immediate mindfulness tips we could get into as far as protecting yourself and your bandwidth?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot I could say about it. One direction I could go in is that you may not know this about me, but as an artist, I had to do all kinds of jobs. And one of the jobs I did really well was a lead gen job where I was selling a moving company. And I had to do, they were, they had signed up to a website thinking that they were getting one individual moving company. And of course, what they got was like 80 assaulting them one after the other. But I was really good at penetrating that wall and then ultimately closing. I was good at my job. It wasn't a great company, so I had to leave that. But I will say that, one direction we can look in is, what does it look like to effectively generate leads? When you're interacting with that lead, how do you close them? Like, what does that process look like? And how does mindfulness play a role in that? And does it play a role? And my response would be, it absolutely plays a role. Because if you're freaking out, if you're anxious and you're not able to process your anxiety effectively, it's going to bleed through the pores of your skin. Whoever is talking to you, they're going to pick up on it. It's almost like, the reverse magnet. It kind of drives people away when they can pick up on the fact that you're not centered, that you're not stable. So we have to, we are not only for our own health, for our physical health, for our mental health, for our emotional hygiene, for our relationships. Not only do we need to practice this, but we need to do it because it's better for our business. Ultimately, we're going to have better interactions. We're going to be operating from a more authentic place. We're going to be fostering connection more naturally. It's not going to feel forced or awkward or like you have this hidden agenda that the other person can smell a mile away. So, all of that, we have to have this foundation that we can lean on. And if I'm not aware, for instance, that I'm feeling wound up and I go into a meeting or I interact with someone, that's not going to go so well. However, if I'm aware, oh, I'm feeling anxious today, and I know how to effectively work with it, how to manage it as an experience, much more likely that I'll go in and have a positive interaction with whoever it is I'm interacting with. So it's a very pragmatic tool. It's a very practical tool. But it requires effort on our parts. We were never trained, first of all, to look at our attention as a resource that is maybe our prime resource, our attention, our ability to leverage, where we focus, how we focus. That's a massive resource that nobody ever kind of points to and says, hey, look at what you've got there. And then as kids, we were never trained we were always told, oh, you have to pay attention, but nobody ever told us how to effectively pay attention. They never said there's an optimal way to pay attention, and then there's a less optimal way to pay attention. And really what's happening now is research has caught on, and that's why mindfulness is on the radar at all, because there's been all this research where we're seeing time and time again that how we pay attention has an impact on our physiology. It can lower our stress, our cortisol levels. Our stress levels can go down just by paying attention correctly, if you will, skillfully. Yeah.
So can you talk about that for a minute? Because I think when people hear mindfulness or meditation or, oh yeah, all the Fortune 500 CEOs are meditating now. It's like, oh yeah, that's, I know myself as a skeptic, you kind of roll your eyes and that's, yeah, whatever, that's great. When you get super rich and you have time to hire a guru or a meditation coach, then I'll look into it. But what is the science actually saying, right? You're in a high stress job. You're in a job where you have to generate leads for a living. There's a million things coming at you. All salespeople have shiny object syndrome to begin with, and then you throw on the fact that they go into a job where there's tons of distractions. What is the science saying? Like, what's the most recent science as far as like, hey, if you can be mindful, you have this kind of production increase, or you have this type of outcome? Like, what is the science telling us?
Yeah, great. And I'm going to try to remember what those outcomes were, because I actually did a research study in the workplace, one of the few mindfulness workplace studies done. In other words, one that's not done in the lab, one that's actually done in the field in this very busy digital marketing firm. The gentleman, Scott Lowry, whose company we did it at, Fathom Digital, and we saw outcomes basically about improved productivity and lower stress. Those were a couple of really big ones. And that's consistent with other findings. So when you understand how to pay attention, your stress levels go down. And one of the biggest reasons they go down is this particular skill that we're calling equanimity at Unified Mindfulness. And there was a recent study by David Cresswell that actually isolated. So Unified Mindfulness frames that mindfulness as a set of 3 skills that are working together, 3 attention skills. One of them is equanimity, another is called sensory clarity, and the third is concentration power. And David isolated those, Dr. Cresswell isolated those and showed that this equanimity skill is particularly important for the stress level to go down. So I'll get into a little more detail about what that is, but when your stress levels go down, obviously you're going to be less likely to get sick, right? And also when you know how to focus, or when you can control your attention, control where you place it, then obviously you're going to be able to be more productive. So those are some obvious impacts on work. But, you know, let me speak for a minute about this skill, equanimity.
Yeah, define what that is and why that matters and how it helps. You talked to me about it before on a hike, and you use some fire truck noises and some other examples. But explain to us what equanimity is. Equanimity is and
equanimity. Great. I will do that. And I'll also add that once you understand mindfulness as a skill set, one of the benefits of that is you don't have to do it sitting down, eyes closed, seated, you know, silent, the way we think of when someone's meditating. You can do it out in daily life, when you're walking around, when you're on a hike, whatever it might be. So it's a little more portable way of thinking about, or a lot more portable way of thinking about practice. That's one of the reasons I really like to teach it. But equanimity, the way we define it is that it's this ability to allow your experience to come and go without push or pull. So to come and go freely. So what do I mean by that? Well, it turns out that we tend to, in many ways, fight with our experience. We fight, we tense up around discomfort. So let's say your shoulders are uncomfortable. We don't know how to just relax the shoulders. We tend to tighten them up. And the reason we do that is to try to contain the discomfort. But that works against us ultimately, because we don't really contain the discomfort. All we do is increase our fatigue level, because we've tensed up in addition to the original discomfort. So we want to try to physically get into the habit of relaxing the shoulders, not unlike if a masseuse were to dig their fingers into your muscles. We welcome that. Even though it's uncomfortable, we welcome that because we know they're releasing tension, right? So turns out that the way we leverage our attention can release physical tension in our body. We can purposefully turn our attention toward physical discomfort and physically relax around it. And that helps the physical discomfort play itself out. And then we're not expending unnecessary energy trying to contain it, constrain it. And so one way to think about our sensory system, so what we see, what we hear, what we feel, that's just a simple way to break it down. Our sensory data system, the way we kind of get information through our senses. You can think of that as a kind of a machinery that can run more or less efficiently. And when we're fighting with our experience, whether it's, we're tensing up around a physical discomfort, whether we are shoving away a feeling that we don't want to feel, whether we're getting caught up in a feeling and then that's turning into all kinds of ruminating and storytelling about bullshit that we shouldn't be thinking about, but we can't help but thinking about it because why? Because our feelings are driving those thoughts and we can't seem to get out of the grip of those feelings. They're so strong. When all that's going on, our system is running less efficiently. It's less productive. It's less enjoyable to be in this body and mind. So we can intentionally begin to reduce the friction in this machinery. We can intentionally find ways to stop interfering with the movement of energy, for lack of a better word, in the sensory system. In other words, if you get pissed off, let's just take anger as an example. You get pissed off, something happens physiologically. You get triggered and there's a ripple through the body. Maybe there's like a tensing in the chest or a clamping of the fists, whatever it might be. There's something physiological happening when you get pissed off. And the trick is, how can you feel that, but not get caught in it, not let it turn into a whole set of stories? And that's the sweet spot where you're having equanimity with it. The sweet spot of equanimity is you allow the experience to come up, you allow the anger, to play itself out, but you don't get so caught in it that it distorts your behavior or your thinking. And that's tough to achieve, but it's doable. And when we do it, our systems tend to run more efficiently. We have more energy for the things that are important to us, that really matter to us. At the end of the day, we're not spinning our wheels on shit that we shouldn't really, that's a waste of our time. So a couple ways to think about equanimity.
So you gave me a leadership tip a long time ago, and I don't even know if you remember this, but I was talking about how like I really care about my team, but I get really frustrated sometimes and things come out of my mouth that I don't mean to. And you told me, you said, hey, have you ever punched somebody in anger? And I think it was a rhetorical question because I assumed that you thought that I had been in plenty of bar fights in my life. And I'm like, yeah, I've boxed before. I've been in my fair share of fights back in the Army. And you said, hey, what is that feeling in your body right before you're going to hit somebody in anger? And I didn't understand what you were saying. And you're like, listen, Scott, you've hit somebody before. Like, does your asshole pucker up? Like, do you clench your fist? Like,
I don't think I said that asshole thing, but it might.
I'm pretty sure you did something to that effect. And you were like, and I told you, I said, oh yeah, I get this like flexing of my chest. Like when I'm boxing and I know I'm about to try to hit somebody, there's like this like tension in my chest, and you said, hey, if you ever feel that, don't talk to your team. Don't make a sales call. Don't call your manager. You're like, nothing good is about to come out of your mouth when you're feeling that tension, that fight or flight. It's time for you to go meditate, take a walk around the block, go get a soda or an iced tea. You're like, just nothing good is coming. As soon as you feel that tightness in your chest, go for a drive because no shit that comes out of your mouth next is going to be good. So is that the barbaric form of equanimity? Like,
well, here's what's beautiful about that. That actually speaks to this other skill of sensory clarity and the way they work together. So sensory clarity is our ability to track and explore our experience in real time. If you have sensory clarity, so that you're catching, it's both, I should say that. Because in order for you to be aware enough to actually notice, oh, that thing's happening where I'm about to punch someone in the face. You actually have to have enough equanimity, momentum with that you're willing to be curious about the thing, right? Because otherwise you'd just be already punching the person in the face. So you've got some equanimity, some momentum with that, but then also you're getting clear. That's that sensory clarity. Oh, it's in my chest. It's like, 9 out of 10 in terms of pressure. It feels like wants to push outward or whatever it is. You become curious about this experience. That's right. And those two combined, the fact that you're getting clear about how that anger is playing out in your body and the fact that you're letting it, you're becoming curious about it instead of acting on it, instead of just automatically knee-jerk response, fuck you, right? And punch the person. You try to stave off that knee-jerk response. That's your equanimity. That's right. And so you take a walk around the block, you're restoring your equilibrium. Now you can have that experience, but it doesn't have to play out the way it has always played out in the past, where you then punch the person. And it can take time. These habits go deep in their conditioning. It's like Pavlov, the dog. We are animals. We're conditioned animals. And it's like, oh, he said that thing, fuck him, right? That's the animal response. But we can grow up beyond that animal response. And it turns out we're better off when we do that. Things tend to go better. We tend to get more of what we want in life when we don't automatically act from the animal response, and we have a little more agency around how we show up. Sometimes it's appropriate to punch someone in the face. I'm not saying that it's never appropriate to do that, but I'm just saying what we want is agency. We want to create enough choice around that. So we're not just automatically, unconsciously knee-jerk reacting to a situation. And yes, what you described is a perfect example of how these skills come into play. If you're not aware of it, if you don't take the time to notice these patterns, these conditioned patterns, then you can't change anything. But the minute you become curious, well, what is this pattern? What's this routine I fall into? It seems like, it's every time so-and-so does such and such, it just triggers me. If you start to become curious about that, then you increase your agency, you increase your choice.
Yeah. And I think one of the reasons why I like your teaching and just kind of the overall unified mindfulness ethos is that when I've heard other people talk about meditation or mindfulness, there's almost this feeling like, well, you've got to get to this place where the temperament is like, you don't care, right? And I know business people, they care passionately about their clients, about their business and whatnot. But I feel like even some of the, more widely known phone apps and stuff, it's almost like trying to convince you that you got to get to this place of peacefulness because you just don't care about the outcome. Well, that's not reality in business. But I feel like all the stuff that you're teaching is like, no, you're still going to have those emotions. You've got to live with them. You've got to learn to understand and control them. But there's something else where you guys are going a layer deeper, like, hey, accept it and move on. I don't know. I'm not articulating this correctly, but maybe you could talk a little bit about the perception of mindfulness out there versus the reality of what you guys are trying to teach.
Yeah, and I'll say too that a lot of the confusion comes around this word equanimity. If people want to look up the word equanimity, you'll find that Unified Mindfulness actually even uses that word differently than the way it may ordinarily be used, which is what you described. A lot of people think that the goal is to not give a shit, or the goal is to be so far removed that you don't feel anything at all. And what we're saying is, no, that's not the goal at all. The goal is actually to feel it completely, but not to over-identify with it. That's the trick. And that's a fine balance. And I can understand why people get confused, because one of the ways that we can start to not get overly identified with our reactions is to find ways to create a little distance. And so there can be this feeling of like, oh, I'm above it all, I'm not really a part of it. That can be one way that we learn how to establish a more balanced relationship to our experience. But that's only a strategy. And strategies will fail you if you start to lock onto them as a crutch, right? So what you're describing is a kind of a young relationship to mindfulness, where you get ideas about what it's supposed to look like, and then you try to just do that all the time. I'm just going to be totally cool with everything. I'm Zen. It doesn't, and that's not sustainable. What we really want is whatever waves are going on, we don't want to repress. We don't want to suppress. That leads nowhere good. We want to let it ride, let it play out, but learn how to let it play out without having to act on it. Learn how to let it play out without it infecting your thinking, distorting your thoughts. And the way we do that is, if we can have enough awareness of it as it's playing out, we don't even have to like pay direct attention to it. There are a couple of options. You can work right with it. You can turn and work with it and notice, like you did, like, oh, okay, I'm feeling this pressure in my chest. Okay, time for a walk around the block. Like you're aware of it, you're tracking it in real time, right? There's that sensory clarity, but you're not acting on it. Another way to go is, oh, I'm feeling this anger. I'm going to intentionally anchor my attention away from it. It's still going to play out. I'm still going to let it do its thing, but I'm not even going to focus on it at all. And again, that's what we call background equanimity. So there's foreground equanimity when you're paying directly to the experience. And then there's background equanimity when you're paying attention to something else, leveraging your focus to focus on something else. That's concentration, to be able to do that successfully. I'm going to focus on that thing, and then I'm going to let this anger play itself out. And oftentimes when we do that, if we are really good at leveraging our focus, anchoring on this other thing, the anger just sort of dissipates on its own. You don't necessarily need to do anything. So there are lots of strategies to help us manage whatever experience comes up. But the goal is definitely not to cut ourselves off from it or to distance ourselves from it. The goal is to learn how to let it play out without owning it, without claiming it as, oh, this is me, this is my stuff. I mean, look, when you're falling asleep at night, all kinds of crazy shit. Have you ever noticed? All kinds of stuff goes through your mind just as you're fading off to sleep. Makes no sense at all. You don't say like, this is me, this is Scott having these thoughts, this word salad crazy, this giant whatever, lobster or something, some random picture, right? You're not like, oh, this is me. Why do we claim ownership over all this other stuff? Like, why do we say this is my anger and it's because he said such and such? And that, it's a bit ridiculous that we will selectively decide our personal identity is married to specific data, specific sensory experiences, and that we're so committed to saying this is me, when, at other times we don't even think twice about not identifying with stuff. So just to kind of loosen the grip on who we think we are, be a little more open to that changing, it just gives us a little more freedom, a little more agency, more choice, so we can start to show up more like we'd like to, and we can start to pay attention to the things that actually really matter to us, that we truly care about, rather than the things that are, a waste of our energy a lot of times.
So I think you went a place that's, I think, super relevant for our time, and maybe even a little dangerous to go here. But you mentioned, so many, yeah, let's get dangerous, right?
Dangerous, right?
So many of us latching on to the identity, this is me. I'm Scott Groves, the loan officer. Or now, as we're seeing, and we can blame it on the media, we can blame it on the politics. You and I were, our favorite topic to argue about politics right before we got on. I feel, and maybe this is just the grumpy old man in me, I feel like things are getting more tribal, more tied up in our identity, more I belong to this movement or this political party, or I completely categorize myself based on the profession that I've chose. I feel like the country, especially, and probably the world, is actually getting less mindful, more snappy. I find myself lashing out from time to time on Facebook, and I'm like, why the fuck did I write that? Like that was somebody attacking like some tribe that I feel like I belong to, and getting in an argument over it. Or, I'm embarrassed to admit I've had arguments with close friends and family members where, thinking back, I'm like, yeah, probably something needed to be said, but I didn't need to say that. So maybe you can talk a little bit about all Americans detaching themselves a little bit more from the tribe or the identity or the political party or whatever it is that just have their tentacles in us. Like, how can we be a little bit more mindfulness of, hey, you know what? Mrs. Raye and Mr. Groves pretty much disagree on every political subject that could possibly come across our desk. And we have amazing conversation, and I love you and I consider you a friend. But that doesn't seem to be the norm right now. So how can we all take a pause, take a breath, come fuck down, and like not be so snappy at each other?
Well, I mean, I do think that we're living in an extremely divisive time. And I think that whatever our beliefs may be, however different they may be, ultimately we all suffer the same. So when a human being suffers, it pretty much looks different. Looks the same. Across the political spectrum, across the socioeconomic spectrum, suffering is suffering. And when we get too married to a position, too stuck in a position, we suffer. That's just how it is. We get caught, and it doesn't feel good to be caught. We become a prison of our own beliefs, et cetera, et cetera. And now, you can look across the room and say, oh, that person's a prisoner of their own beliefs. What's wrong with them that they don't, right? But if you're pointing the finger, you are in the position of pointing the finger. So you yourself are stuck in that fixation. So we all get caught, is the bottom line. And, what's tricky about it, I guess, is that there are times when people need to be protected. And so there are times when it's important to make sure that they get proper protection, and that there's gray areas of what people consider the moral responsibility of an individual. And the thing is, we're not going to agree on what the moral responsibility of an individual is. So I'm going to sidestep that, because I can't dictate for anyone what your individual moral responsibility is. It's not really my job or my area of expertise. But what I can say is that when we suffer, it's the same old routine. We're getting caught, we're getting stuck. We've lost that agency. We've lost that freedom. So how do we regain it? We've got to regain it by taking responsibility for what's going on the inside here, each one of us. That's really the only way we can do it. So when we get triggered by whatever, it's my job. If I'm getting triggered, it means that regardless of who I think slapped me in the face just then because I'm triggered, I'm still the one that has to manage whatever comes up inside right now. I got to feel what I'm feeling. And if I don't manage it, if I shove it down, it's going to come out in some inappropriate way in some other setting that I'm going to regret. Right. So, and if I, or right now, it's going to come out in some sort of retaliation that I'm going to regret. So we got to all just grow the fuck up and start to own our shit when it comes up for us. When we get triggered, it's our job to work through our feelings, because we're not going to be effective at getting what we really want and need if we can't do that for ourselves. So that's sort of a general principle. And like everybody else, I'm working with my stuff too. I grew up in New Jersey, as you might tell. So I've got some, got a little spark to me. And that's something that I've had to work through. Mostly came up around, phone companies, conversations with the airlines and phone companies. That's when I would really get kind of let my, aggression come through. So I have my work to do, like everybody does. But the key is that at a certain point, you stop pointing fingers and you start getting aware of what's going on inside you, so you can make the changes you need to make given the conditions as they are. And, so there's a place for both recognizing that systems are broken and also, processing how you feel, so you can actually make more intelligent decisions about how to address those things that are broken.
So tell us what it actually looked like, right? So I'm bought in. I need some more mindfulness training. I want to join your small group coaching or whatever. What does it actually look like? Is it 10 minutes a day where I go and try to learn Indian words that I can't repeat? Is it 2 hours a day I've got to focus on myself and like get in touch with my inner child? Like, what does an actual coaching program through Unified Mindfulness look like?
Well, basically the good news about it is it's really tailored to the individual. I mean, we have standard techniques. But one of the things I really love about Unified Mindfulness is it's really a theoretical model for all these types of practices. So if you're someone who wants to get in touch with your inner child, we can show you how to optimize that. If you're someone who wants to learn Indian words you don't understand, we can help you understand how to make the most of that. If you're someone who wants to do one of our standard techniques, great, we'll help you with that too. So what it is recognizing that whatever the form is, whether it's learning some special word or whether it's focusing on your breath or whatever technique you're taught, the intention behind that technique is to strengthen very specific skills, attention skills. Concentration, sensory clarity, and equanimity is how Unified Mindfulness frames that. And it's one of the only approaches, or possibly even the only approach I know, that really sets the skill development front and center. Because at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. Do what, do you, if you want to focus on your breath, great, whatever. If you want to, we're not concerned about that. We're going to give you standard techniques as a place to start if you want a place to start. But ultimately, as long as you're developing those three skills, then you're doing what you need to do to help your nervous system, lower your stress, improve your well-being overall. And I'll add that, I never could have imagined, I didn't know what I didn't know when I started training. I was so miserable and so fucked up. And I couldn't believe that 10 minutes of practice a day, 10 minutes is fine. It's a great place to start to develop the habit. But I couldn't imagine that would do anything at all for me. I was desperate and broke, and it was free. And so that sounded good to me at the time. But when I got deeper and did more practice, more training, enough training, the kind of tipping point hit, and I suddenly got a window into the potential of this practice. I had no idea that just training your attention could have such a noticeable impact on my whole physiology. I just felt better in ways that I didn't even know I could feel better. So it can be surprising what it yields, but basically you are learning techniques to strengthen 3 attention skills. When those 3 attention skills are working together, we call that mindfulness. You will notice that it's nothing new for you. When you're in the zone at work, when you're having a good day, when you're having a good run, those skills are already coming into play. You're deeply absorbed in what you're doing. There's the concentration. You notice subtleties, subtle aspects of your experience that you normally overlook, like, oh, if I just shift my position a little bit there, I can release that tension. Let's say you're running or what have you. That's that sensory clarity. And then equanimity is that sense of like, yeah, there's that sense of synchronicity. Everything seems to be just sort of unfolding. It's all going like you have a great day with lead gen, right? It's like, oh, quick, 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 quick. You're connecting with people, you're relating to them, you close this deal. There's that sense of effortlessness and ease that we can think of as related to equanimity. So when those skills are operating together, you already know what that's like. All this does is say, we need to formalize it. We need to give you a structure, and you need to work that shit out. You need to develop, strengthen these skills if you really want them to be consistently available to you. And you need to strengthen them, not only so they're repeatable, but so they're transferable to more and more of your life, because you deserve to have a life that's more and more in the zone. You deserve to have a life where you're actually feeling good more of the time. And that just takes some effort for a lot of us to develop these skills systematically. So the coaching involves you finding what techniques work for you, so you can tailor make a practice that's going to be meaningful for you, whether it's something you do seated, whether it's something you do in daily life, what technique you'd like to do because, hey, you enjoy that technique. So that's the process. You learn to tailor make a practice, and you're really empowered. We really let you decide, what it's going to look like for you, because we don't want to impose, we don't want to prescribe something that you might not enjoy. A lot of people don't enjoy focusing on the breath. So we don't lead with that, because there are some people who just find it boring, or we want you to find what works for you.
Yeah, I've got to tell you, one of the reasons I wanted to interview you is not only because I think you're great, and I think the stuff is relevant to salespeople. Like, I haven't been sleeping well. I've got so many jumbled thoughts, and for us mortgage people, the market is on fire, and I've got the side business that I work on, and I get the kids here, and I'm trying to be a good father, and then I'm like, oh shit, there's so much time going to that, I'm not a good husband. So whereas I used to hit the pillow and sleep 8 hours straight, no problem, now it's like I'm having some trouble falling to sleep, and I'm kind of waking up at 4 o'clock in the morning in a panic. But I remember from some of the work that I had done in your digital class when you first launched that very first course, I was like, oh, when I actually do the practice, just like 10 minutes of calm your mind, I was having like the best sleep ever. And you and I have that joke from the very first time I saw you talk, that I just picture this blank TV with a banana flying at my face, and I would just fall asleep with this like banana flying at my face, which we can talk about that later. Maybe there's some Freudian thing going on there. But I wanted to talk to you again to like go back to that digital course myself, reconnect with some of these tools, because I think for a lot of people in business, you get into the like hustle and bustle and the grind, and you just think that's the only way, that maybe there's not even a way in this market to calm our mind. But you're saying there is at 10 minutes a day and some practice.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Just the idea that there isn't any other way is just an idea. It's just an idea you're hooked on, right? Why? Goes back to what I was saying before. Why own that idea? That's a dead end idea. Why stick with that one?
Right.
So, but we stick with all these stupid dead end ideas. Why? Who knows why? Because we're conditioned to, because somebody, whatever, when we were 5 told us to believe that. And so we just have walked around the world thinking that's the way it is without questioning ourselves at all. So we're just in the habit that we're in, and everybody's in that. I'm not speaking like I don't know what it's all about. I'm saying we're all in that habit, but we all have this resource that's available to us where we can pull ourselves out of that. And it's surprisingly relieving to do that. And so why not change? We talk about interior decorating, right? As part of, right, homes, you want to make the nice home. But meanwhile, what about this home that we're walking around in? We wake up in every day. We leave our physical homes, not as much these days, but
right.
we never leave, we're always in this body and mind. So why wouldn't we work to have a body and mind that's easier to be in?
That's awesome. So if somebody wanted to get in touch with you, what's the easiest way to get signed up? I know a lot of loan officers. I know a lot of realtors. I know a lot of salespeople in various businesses right now that are frustrated. They're triggered. They're lashing out at people. I just heard actually, really tragically, a mortgage company, their entire closing department, like all the people that send out the documents and everything, they're instrumental to getting every transaction in America closed. The company, all the closers, a couple dozen of them, were feeling so abused that, like a union, they all got out and walked out the same day. That company is fucked. Like they're not going to be able to close a loan for a couple of weeks because, the loan officers weren't being mindful about how they were treating their fellow man, their team members, the people they count on. So if you're somebody who's found a whole lot of extra stress over the last 90 days because business is too good or business is zero, or you're not used to spending this much time with your wife and kids, I might be projecting there a little bit. Where do people get signed up? Where do they start? Where do they find you? What course would you recommend?
Yeah, so I mean, we have a free video series, which is a great low bar of entry way to get introduced to it and see if it makes sense for you. It's at unifiedmindfulness.com/core, CORE. And that's where I would recommend starting off because it's like people love it. It's 10 videos. It goes through all the skills in detail and really gives you all you need to start a practice for yourself. So that's what I would recommend, unifiedmindfulness.com/core.
I just posted it here. I was keeping an eye on that. Do me a favor, if you've been watching this or you're watching the replay, do me a favor, just leave a comment, hit the like button, give Julianna some shout out and some praise because she took time out of her busy day running 160 coaches. I'm so excited for you. Like I remember 6-7 years ago when we first met, you're like, yeah, I'm trying this business model thing and I don't know how it's going to go. And maybe it'll be an app, maybe it'll be group coaching. And now you're just crushing life. So congratulations. Maybe we can have you on in a few weeks and just dive into like how you actually built the business. Cause I know you've got to lead generate for mindfulness clients, right? That's the
time. Absolutely.
You can be the Dalai Lama. And if you don't have a client, it doesn't really matter. You've got no one to teach.
There you go.
All right, cool. Well, thank you for being on. I love you. I appreciate you. And yeah, let's talk in a couple of weeks and let's just talk about your actual business and how you grew it. And I'll pick your brain about lead generation.
Great. Sounds like a plan.
All right. Thank you so much. And yeah, thanks again.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Bye.